Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got with me Damian Smith. Now, Damian is a facilitator in parts of our EXLF program, the parts that deal with high-performing teams. So we're going to talk very much about what is a high-performing team today and how do you create one. But Damian, welcome to the Grow CFO Show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Damian, tell us a little bit about you.
I'm Damian Smith. I'm the CEO of Thrive. We're team and leadership coaches, also the lead for Middle East Africa for Grow CFO. And we are, as an organization, focused on creating teams that overachieve results and also humane, which is a byproduct, I believe, of profitable, sustainable cultures.
Exactly. But Damian, I believe a lot of what you're teaching and helping teams with comes from your own origin story. Because I think you described yourself to me when we were chatting yesterday before we recorded as an ex-toxic CFO. Tell me about that.
Well, it was quite a journey, I suppose. I spent 25 plus years in some of the biggest tech and telco companies in the world, always in finance, brands like Vodafone and Telefonica, and moving to BlackBerry, which at the time was the fastest growing tech company in the world. And then to Sony, where at the end of my time there, I was the regional CFO for a $1 billion business unit across Middle East and Africa. And I got the opportunity for the first time. I had a team in the hundreds at the end of my time in Sony. And for the first time, got some development training and went off to a leadership development program in Stockholm School of Economics Executive Education School. Which was an amazing opportunity where I had an incredibly traumatic experience. We got all of the results back from psychometric assessments and my results were anomalous. After a long time in finance, you start to see patterns in numbers quite quickly, and mine were, well, they were freaking out. I remember saying to myself, am I mad? Luckily, there was some great coaches there to work with, and they guided me through a process where I realized I'd been pretending to be someone else in the workplace for the last 20 odd years. And
pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah, indeed. I was pretending to be what the Americans would call a massive a-hole, I believe, if that's the right translation. I was extremely aggressive, got very good at fighting and winning, playing politics, only finding kind of win-lose situations, and being pretty scary in some instances. To realize that all of a sudden I was being like that. I hadn't been consciously aware of my behaviors, but all of a sudden realizing that my behaviors were so different to what I became later aware of. They were so different from my own values was a pretty traumatic experience. And it was a big day. Very big day. And then from that moment on, everything changed for me. I became obsessed with learning about what authentic leadership was, building self-awareness, learning everything I could. And the first thing I did was track down the author of the book that the leadership program was actually based on, poor chap, Jim Tam, who wrote Radical Collaboration. I tracked him down and convinced him to let me stay with him for 10 days while he taught me how to teach his program. That was just the first step. Then went on to training in many coaching methodologies.
Okay, you were a CFO when you went on the leadership program.
Yeah.
Why the sudden change then into coaching leadership, training leadership?
It took a few years, a couple of years, I guess, while I was still in Sony. Firstly, I was religiously implementing everything I learned, which took an enormous amount of vulnerability, because I'd destroyed an awful lot of trust and relationships and had been demonstrating a lack of skill in conflict and not being aligned with values and consistent in my leadership and not being a situational leader, doing pretty much everything I can think of wrong, really. And that took an awful lot of work, but it was so important to me to unlearn the behaviors that you could say had been conditioned into in the corporate world, but it was a choice unconsciously. During this period, it started having a really great impact on my teams, and everybody became aligned and empowered, or more empowered and able to step up and develop. And as I started being a more coach-like leader, this had a great effect, which meant that I became less busy. I was able to support my team and do less, get caught up in less weeds and less conflicts, and have a huge amount more time. And at that point, I got the opportunity to fulfill my dream as a finance business partner, which somebody had told me a very long time ago. The objective should be, if your business partner got hit by a bus, then you would be the automatic choice to step in for a while, at least, because you know so much about the business as opposed to just the past and the accounting. And I got to step across into sales and marketing, be the head of sales and marketing for North Africa and Egypt. And that was an amazing experience, and incredibly rare for senior finance people to then make that transition into sales. It was humbling and amazing at the same time. Now, during this time, I was coaching in the background, and at a certain point, I realized that I could follow my calling. I guess I'd found my purpose, which was to move into supporting teams and individuals to become purpose-led rather than fear-led. And I became a full-time coach about 6 years ago.
Excellent. So, but that full-time coach wasn't necessarily talking to finance people 6 years ago. So I believe that you've come full circle now and come back to finance.
Yeah, it's been circle's a good way of putting it. I wanted nothing to do with anything to do with my past career at that point. And I focused on working with senior women executives, individual one-to-one coaching to begin with. And over time, I'd say got dragged, but I enjoyed working in the corporate environment and bringing my experience to the team and coaching work. I have I suppose I would call myself a recovering toxic CFO. I was in recovery for a good few years. And of late, I suppose of the last couple of years, being asked to do more and more work with finance, and have really just enjoyed it so much because I can bring my experience as well to the space. And it's been a huge amount of fun, and also realizing how important that is for me. And for my mission, I think finance is ideally placed at the center of a business to have a huge impact. And that's what it's about. I'm incredibly frustrated that the way of leading, I would say, or managing businesses is primarily around pushing and driving harder and controlling and protecting and making sure we're complying, being in fear. When these behaviors are negatively, and we've got huge amount of data on this, huge amount of data with some of the tools that I use, with over 300,000 leaders having used them and millions of data points, I think we could be saying. These behaviors that we see as quite normal often in the corporate world are actually negatively correlated to leadership effectiveness, which is negatively correlated to profitability. So we're creating all of this stress and ruining lives. And I personally had I'm not sure if breakdowns was the right word, but probably is. There's a huge amount of stress, and that all gets taken home to our families and our children and our communities. And you're between 33 and 55% more likely to develop a serious illness such as heart disease if you don't feel empowered and you have a lack of direction in your work. So if you extrapolate that across the world, we're literally killing millions of people, and it's not even profitable. No. If it was, I don't know, it wouldn't be very nice, but I'd have less of an issue with it. It's just insane that we're doing this, and it's actually reducing profitability in the medium and long term.
Yeah. We've got a typical finance team. It's okay, but it's muddling along. How would you turn the typical finance team into a high-performing team?
What I've learned by applying lots of different methodologies, working with mostly leadership teams to begin with, and then more recently finance teams, is that the fundamentals are quite the same. Teams are struggling with alignment. As they get bigger and more stressed, we see more evidence of infighting and silos. And all of this has a negative impact on the results that the team is trying to achieve. And what we have found is by taking the bits from different models that we've used in team transformation work with people like Patrick Lencioni and Charles Feltman and other things that Simon Sinek, for example, has made very popular, although in the industry, he's just very good at renaming things and creating a brand.
Aren't all the best developers just very good at stealing other people's stuff?
Yes. Well, I think it has a really great positive impact because he's made many more people aware of it. But to pretend it's new ideas, the idea of why and how, which typically we would call purpose and values, is a little disingenuous. So what we've found is by starting with the fundamentals of building trust first, because without trust, people won't say what they feel. And if they don't say what they feel, then they'll avoid conflict. Now, conflict seems like something most people want to avoid, and create harmony is a great thing. But actually, from a systemic coaching point of view, conflict is just something trying to happen, and we need to get curious about that. And it can be a huge strength if we're skillful in the way we have conflict, because if we don't have that conflict, then we won't get to the best answers. Wonderful quote from Lencioni, which is, with trust, conflict just becomes the pursuit of the best possible answer.
Because conflict only really comes from two or more individuals having a different view of what they want the outcome to be here.
Absolutely.
If person A can understand why person B needs that outcome, and person B can understand why person A needs a different outcome, then you can resolve that conflict.
I couldn't agree more. You've hit on one of the core things that I've learned over the last few years. If I was to be asked what one thing would change people's careers, would be to paraphrase from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is first seek to understand and then to be understood. And when you've got conflict, as you said, two people having different perspectives on outcome or what the facts are, if those two people can approach it with curiosity and see it as, if they're having conflict, then they're not understanding something and it's an opportunity to learn. And when both of you do that, you can find a way of collaborating, making the pie bigger rather than cutting it in half.
Absolutely. So, I agree. You need the trust piece to be able to do that. So the process starts with trust. How do you start getting the team to trust each other?
It's actually really easy. Let me reframe. It's actually really simple. It may not be easy, but the perspective of trust is usually one around, Kevin will do that report on time. I trust him, or he'll get it right. But actually, we've found in the research that trust is more complicated than that. And there's a great model from Charles Feltman, which talks about 4 different areas of trust. Reliability, will I do what I say? Sincerity, do I mean what I say? Competence, can I do what I say I'm going to do, or be aware enough to get help and ask the right questions? These 3 areas, which obviously can be broken and you can mend them. But the fundamental piece that's missing is care. And that's much harder to fix and much more important. This is, do I feel like we're in this together? Is this person making decisions with my interests at heart? That's a bit I don't think many people think about. And we're certainly not trained to think about it in finance. Being empathetic isn't one of the modules that I went through when I was doing my CIMA exams. And yet, without that, we really struggle. The definition of trust, something like willing to make something you care about vulnerable to somebody else's actions. And again, that's from Feltman.
Yeah, I suppose that a lot of delegation comes out of that. Why don't you delegate something? It's probably because you're frightened that somebody else doesn't do it the way you would.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you don't trust them, right?
Yeah.
In simple parts. That's incredibly important for a leader, and very common, I feel, in finance, because we're conditioned from day one to get everything perfect, and that any mistake or any non-compliance, anything less than 100% is not acceptable. That may get you to a certain point in your career, but to quote Marshall Goldsmith, what gets you here doesn't get you there. And we're talking about leading teams, so it's going to be people more senior. If a team leader is a perfectionist, then it predominantly just creates stress.
Yeah.
and a place of fear where people are unable to have vulnerability trust, to feel safe enough to say, I need help or I've got something wrong, and people start hiding things
And
and not asking for help.
Making mistakes. Okay, you don't want a big mistake in the numbers that you've published as a finance team. You want to try and avoid that. But generally, getting things wrong isn't making huge mistakes. It's having a great learning experience.
Absolutely.
That's certainly the way I learn, and I'm trying to do something. Oh, it doesn't work. What have I got to do different to make that happen? Try something else. Okay, that's fine. And you pick up the right and the wrong ways to do things. And I think from that point of view, from stepping out of finance into my own business, certainly my two biggest learnings were it's okay to make mistakes, and whatever you're producing doesn't have to be perfect. Good enough's good enough.
I couldn't agree more. And yet it takes courage to be able to let your team make some mistakes. Now, we're not talking about, there should be boundaries and guardrails, as you don't want to make a mistake that's so large you go out of business, right? But then there are ways of doing that and giving people responsibility. I suppose this goes back to your last question about how to create a team that's high performing, because once you've got a team that can be skillful and have healthy conflict, having built the trust to allow them to do that, then they will say what they really feel about things, and only then will they be committed to the way of doing things. And this is where we get to the purpose. Why are we here as an organization? Why is our team in finance here? What's the impact that we want to have? And this sounds quite high level. People are used to hearing this talked about an organizational level, but actually within the organizations and within the functions, we see that there's a huge benefit from having a nested purpose. So when the teams are clear on that purpose and are aligned behind it, and then they can get clear on, again, the nested values of their team. So how do we do things around here? And not the values that we see stuck on the walls of organizations or the websites. Very little correlation between that and reality. Integrity, for example, was one of the values of Enron.
Yes. Oh, I remember sitting in my office when I was in my latter days in the chemical industry, and we're right on the corner of the chemical site, and next door, they built a big gas-fired power station. Enron were the runner of that power station, and that made me think, oh gosh, Enron, this is a huge company. They can just afford to chuck that amount of capital in there. And I got to know quite a bit about Enron and these values, and suddenly the whole thing collapses because they weren't living their values at all.
No, indeed. It's a great example. But we see that all of the time. There's very few organizations that are living their values. Luckily, I've worked with some over time that have embedded the values into the way they do things. I was talking to an incredible example just recently in medical supplies, a great case study, because they start every meeting without fail talking about their values, usually by bringing a story up about how they've seen the values in action recently. Absolutely every time. And the reason that flows through is because values-led organizations, people know how to be, how to behave, how our way of doing things around here is, which means that there's a lot more autonomy. People know how to do things. It's clear. And if you're behaving in line with your values, you won't be punished. So it creates an awful lot more space for leaders to lead rather than micromanage. It creates the space for trust because we trust people to do things the way that we agree, these operationalized values as opposed to just words. And it takes some work, but it's actually incredibly effective. And the company I was talking to, for example, has grown every year for 50 years, with the exception of one of the COVID years. There was a little blip, and they're at 18.1 billion now. And it's the fact that steady growth as well. It wasn't huge growth. It's just steady growth for 50 years because they honor their values and do it all of the time. And values-led teams, 4 times more engaged. Loads of organizations now are doing engagement surveys. And if you've got a trouble with engagement, this is such a winner. 4 times more engaged. And highly engaged teams, because they've got high values embedded, are 20% more productive. So again, it's driving profit as well and results. It's not fluffy woo-woo stuff that only coaches talk about. This actually has a huge result.
You get team values, but you get personal values. Presumably, there's got to be a huge alignment between the two.
Huge alignment. There's Coach K, one of I think the greatest basketball coach in the NBA, talks about having values discussion. His teams are values led. And all it takes is to just sit down and talk about what this value means to you. And you're absolutely right. If your values are not in alignment, if you can't honor your personal values in the environment that you're in, which I couldn't honor all of my values in being in-house in big corporates. I don't think I have a value around freedom, for example. If there's no overlap, if you can't honor your personal values, then you're not going to feel comfortable. It's going to be dissonant and you will not be enjoying your time there. If you're not enjoying your time there and it doesn't feel right, then you won't be highly motivated. But there certainly should be significant overlap. And the problem is, or rather the opportunity, isn't just to embed values in meetings and the way we do things in-house. Absolutely critical to embed it in the recruitment process. So everything about the way the organization talks about it has to be in line with the values. People have to, when leaders are living the values themselves, then they're able to ask questions of potential recruits in a way that lets them listen for the values. Because you've never had an interview where somebody's come in and said, well, I looked at the values on the website and 3 of them I'm fully aligned with, but 1 of them absolutely not. Nobody tells the truth, do they? They just come in and say, I'm fully in line with the values because they want the job. So we need to understand what behaviors we would be seeing if the values were being lived, and then listen for those behaviors.
I recorded a podcast with a chap called Felix Verardi, who is big into implementing strategy, very fast growth. And we're talking about this idea. One of the things that he does early on is make sure that the values of the organization, the values of the team, particularly the strategy team, are completely aligned. And he's saying quite simply that, hang on a minute, the people that share your values will be your A performers. The people that don't share your values will be your C performers. So that right at recruitment stage is absolutely vital, because if you're recruiting somebody who doesn't share your values, chances are you've just recruited a C performer.
Absolutely. Well, they become so over time once their initial keenness to conform wears off, because you can't fake that. So I guess to answer your question, though, they may not be 100% aligned, but there should be a significant overlap. If you've got a Venn diagram, there should be a lot that are overlapping, and they may be called different things, but this is why exploring what the values actually mean, because the words are just labels. It's the behaviors and the aspirations and the things that you can't be with, or the things that make your heart sing when you're in that environment. This is what you need to dig into, but people don't take the time.
So, Damon, this is all fantastic stuff. Now, you're bringing your Thrive methodology into Grow CFO, correct? So,
yes.
Thrive, how does Thrive fit with what we've just spoken about?
Thrive is, we've almost talked about all of the 6 steps within Thrive, and there's
the letters THRYVV.
Very good. Yep. So we've got trust foundations. Again, healthy conflict, because without trust, people will avoid conflict. And then things won't be said. We've got our real purpose and your values, actual values that are embedded in the organization that we discover rather than stick on the wall and tell people that's how they should be. Because only when everyone's aligned behind this will they commit to what the organization, the team is trying to do. And then we have, this is incredibly important bits, the 2 V's there in Thrive are victorious goals. And what we do here with teams is understand what the goals they would have to be seen as a success in the next couple of years. And that may be completely different from the operational goals, the KPIs. I work with sales organizations where their victorious goals are not sales numbers, but creating, for example, a culture of learning, just as you talked about earlier. And they're over 2 years to be seen as a success, i.e. hit the sales numbers. The team's goals are to create a team where people learn and grow and get better and support each other. It could be that, or it could be hard numbers as well. It depends. All teams are different. And then the final bit, which is like the bad boy of team and leadership development, is accountability. Because only if everyone's co-created the goals where they believe in them and be committed, as we talked about. But the important bit there is without accountability, where you create a culture that people hold themselves accountable, then you won't have a focus on the results. And this is where you end up with a team leader who feels like they're the only one that cares about results, and they start micromanaging, being perfectionists, not growing the team, and you end up in a dysfunctional circle. And accountability is like the cherry on the cake when you've got all of the other steps there and you create an accountable culture, which again can be quite simple. As simple as sitting around with your team and saying, how do we want to be about accountability, and designing that as a team. And we teach structures that make it a lot easier. For example, people, when their bosses tell them what to do, they usually just say yes, and off they go, and often fail because they haven't clarified what success looks like. They haven't checked whether they've got the resources, the time and the knowledge to be able to deliver on that. They haven't asked for help and extra resources. And they are also often avoid flagging a risk to a deadline at the earliest place because of the fear. So again, back to the trust bit. And of course, one of the biggest things I experienced from my perspective in BlackBerry was leadership not holding themselves accountable, which then destroys trust.
Yes.
So you're digging out the foundations from the very top. Incredible experience, that.
Okay. So we've covered a lot there, Damien. We've gone through each step, actually, of a 6-step model that's in Thrive in a reasonable amount of detail. Starting with that bit of trust. Clearly, I can see where you thought, oh, all of this is so radical from where I've been. You wanted to be away from finance and working somewhere else. You've come full circle back to it. So what advice would you give to a finance leader who's got a dysfunctional team?
The natural reactive tendency is to push harder, to set firmer deadlines, to be more directive. And yet what's actually needed is to pause and listen to people to build that trust. Quite a lot of my leadership coaching clients as well, this is often something that comes up, an exercise that I did it myself as well, is to, and this comes from Radical Candor, which is an amazing TED talk and book as well, is for the leader to ask, what could they start doing or stop doing that would support the team to do their job better? I would recommend doing it one-on-one, although it could be facilitated in a group setting. That can take a little bit more facilitation skill, but at least one-to-one. It's incredibly important, though, to be skillful in the way you do this, which means not replying. You just ask the question and shut up.
That is an art, asking the question and shutting up.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to say things like, oh, tell me some more about that?
Asking powerful questions is good.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's also a skill that develops over time. If this is your first experience of doing something like this, I'd recommend starting with shutting up and listening. And as you hitting the nail on the head, of course, that skillful listening is actually asking powerful questions to understand. Only if you're coming from a place of understanding, of trying to understand genuinely, rather than what I found myself doing is to ask questions to prove the other person wrong or reinforce my bias. So it's an easy thing to fall into, I think, especially in finance, because we're trained to, historically, we've been trained to be the police and to find people wrong. And that just caused defensiveness. I also facilitate the finance business partner program on Grow CFO as well, which is incredible and so much fun and so impactful on teams. And that is an area that comes up a lot there, of finance creating resistance because of this legacy of how we are.
And it's funny, that thought went through exactly my mind as you were talking about it. Finance says no.
Yeah, indeed. And that was something that was massive, being on the other side of the fence in sales and learning in sales again, what I wish I'd known when I was in finance, which is everything that's in the FBP Finance Business Partner Program. But to close on your very good question about powerful questions, I would say if you're skilled at keeping yourself and you're noticing that you're not being reactive, your heartbeat isn't raising, your blood pressure hasn't got up, you're not feeling defensive, then by all means ask questions. But that may not be the case. And to begin with, it may be best to just shut up, listen, and then say, and this is important, to say thank you. And if it was feedback that's a little uncomfortable, which ideally it will be, to be honest, it should be uncomfortable. And if it was, you can acknowledge that was uncomfortable to hear, and I'll go and reflect on it. The other bits that are incredibly important is to go and follow up, to make sure that you reflect on the feedback. And if you, when you're not triggered and not in a reactive state, if you genuinely don't see the value in the suggestion, to go and explain carefully why. And otherwise, action it and follow up and check that it's having the impact that you require. Now, what's important about this is if you are asking for feedback, you're also creating a culture where feedback is normal, and you start this ability because you're proving that if people tell you what they believe, they will not suffer, then this starts building trust. And there are many other simple exercises that we can do with our teams to build trust. But it's got to start there, and just by listening, for example.
There are two things there that are very important. First of all, you've got to be open to receiving negative feedback. And a lot of people, as soon as they hear anything negative, will go on the defensive. So that's something that you've got to resist in that situation. And the second one is, if you elicit all of this feedback and you don't do something about it, or you don't follow it up, then isn't that the fastest possible way you've got of losing trust?
Absolutely, because you're not holding yourself accountable, which destroys trust. Yeah, and this is why leaders, there's a definition with, I support a leadership development program and with the Coactive Training Institute, and their definition of leadership is a leader is someone that grows their capacity to take responsibility for their world, which I love.
Say that again.
A leader is someone that grows their capacity to take responsibility for their world.
I like that.
Yeah, I can't claim it was from me, but it's a Kimsey House family create this amazing stuff. And that's what you need to do as a leader. You need to take responsibility. And if you're not...
Damian, I am very conscious that we've been talking for ages. Hopefully we haven't switched our audience off.
Well, we'll find out, I guess.
Where can people find out more about your work in the Thrive programs?
Very exciting time to ask that, because through Grow CFO, I would suggest, is the best way to start if you're in finance. There's some amazing programs there. The Thrive core program implementation is we go in and work with teams ourselves with systemic coaches to facilitate the transformation. But the new news is that having spent all of this time away from finance and now feeling ready to share the 6 steps that I've learned as a systemic and leadership coach that I wish I'd known when I was a finance team leader, is we're launching the Thrive Fundamentals, which is teaching leaders, teaching them in an experiential way so that they learn the steps we've talked through, and importantly, some exercises that they can take away and implement with their teams immediately. So that's on Grow CFO if you look for the XLF programs, and then Thrive Fundamentals.
We'll put links to all of this in the show notes.
There's also my YouTube channel with some various videos, and my LinkedIn as well, where I write things. And we're just squeezing conversations with publishers about my book on the topic, which may be out imminently. I don't
even have already been published by the time we actually get this podcast.
It may have. I hope so.
If it has, there'll be a link in the show notes.
Great.
Damian, that was fantastic. Thank you for being this week's guest on the Grow CFO Show.
Thank you, Kevin. I really enjoyed it, and I loved your questions. Excellent.